For this weekend's shipwreck video, we'll be returning to Savo Island, and the third of the three American cruisers lost that night in the form of USS Quincy. The first of the three to be lost, and one that was shot to ribbons prior to her sinking. No other American shipwreck comes to mind with so many visible shell holes in the survey. Not even her similarly battered sister ships. When looking at the damage plate, this shouldn't be surprising. That said, there are some interesting features to this wreck outside of the shell holes, notably the bow turrets and their damaged barrels, or the collapsed stern, which is arguably the worst of the three in this regard. We'll be covering all of that today as a companion piece to my previous video based on Ballard's 1990s survey. Right, since I've covered this wreck before, and the ship herself as well, I won't linger long on the sinking for today. This came in the early hours of August 9th, 1942, the Battle of Savo Island, where the cruisers Aoba, Furutaka, and Tenryu caught Quincy in their searchlights. Within minutes, the cruiser was ablaze from stem to stern. Now, to their credit, Quincy's gunners did fire back. One of her shells even hit the Japanese flagship Chokai, very nearly killing the Japanese commander, Admiral Mikawa, in the process. The admiral was lucky to come out unharmed when that shell plowed through the chart room, killing or wounding 36 men in the process. As for Quincy, she would be hit in turn by both shell fire and up to 3 torpedoes. The cruiser would lose 370 of her crew, with a further 167 wounded. No amount of damage control would save her either. Quincy sank bow first around 2:38 a.m. on August 9th, 1942. The first ship lost in Ironbottom Sound. When Quincy slipped beneath the waves, the ship was lost for decades. Her wreck wouldn't be located until, as noted, the 1990s. Specifically 1992, when Robert Ballard found the hulk, at a depth of around 2,000 feet or 610 meters. Ballard found a ship with a wrecked bow, a collapsed stern, and damaged turrets. However, Quincy did retain much of her superstructure. Neither of her sisters can say the same. Unfortunately, the Nautilus survey didn't show the bridge. I'll put some of Ballard's footage here for completion's sake. All things being equal, Quincy's bridge is quite well preserved, especially in light of the fires. Still, as this video is focusing on the Nautilus survey, let's shift there now, starting of course with the weaponry. As we're already on the bow, we'll begin with a pair of bow turrets. These are the ones to show damage, and a quite distinct kind of damage at that. Both are trained to starboard, and both have damaged barrels. Something that is, admittedly, not immediately apparent looking down on turret 1. The 3 barrels are elevated, yes, but the damage isn't clear. Other than, if you're looking closely here, a shorter barrel. This was jammed, and that's left it slightly further back in the turret, and by extension, shorter than the other 2. Quincy's gunners were doing their best in a bad situation, but their gun failed them here. It seems to have jammed back after firing, leaving it shorter than the other 2. Only because part of it is further back in the turret. It's not actually shorter, even if it looks that way from closer in here, or here from a different angle. No, to actually have a shorter barrel, you need to shift to turret 2. The bow superfiring turret here. Again, from this angle, there's not much apparent damage. It's not clearly rusted out, like, say, Teruzuki, nor are there any apparent shell hits. Moving up, however, shows the shortened barrel. quite visible indeed when you look here. Unlike the jammed barrel on the first turret, this one outright burst about halfway up. That's not something you see often on shipwrecks, to put it mildly, and it's very distinctive damage. Another sign of just how much Quincy's gunners tried to fight back despite their doomed situation. And coupled with the jammed barrel, a legacy to their bravery and determination, as much as it being impressive damage as well. Either way, from here, we move back to the first turret, but from the other side. There's a very notable bit of something wrapped around it here. I can't quite make it out myself, not even from the front here. This angle does make it look wider. Maybe some split metal that fell away. I can't say for sure. As for the barrels, this shows the lack of damage to those, along with a surprising lack of silt and marine life. There's certainly coral, don't get me wrong, but the barrels are fairly clean, considering how long she's been down there. Something that applies further up as well. This one has more covering, while the jammed gun has less. It's an interesting comparison to other wrecks like Laffey, which is completely coated in coral. That said, we've reached the end of the bow turrets now. A look at the back of the turret here, though from a decent distance back. It's a nice framing shot of the entire turret, but too blurry to make out details, aside from the intact rangefinder ears at the back. Still, with nothing else to note here, let's move to the third turret, the stern turret, which is interesting in its own regard. Mostly for the condition of the deck around it, admittedly, as the turret itself is broadly intact. We can see that here. It's rusty and covered in marine life, as you could expect, but there's no visible damage. Not to the turret, not to the barrels, and not to the rangefinder. Even the ladder on the side looks fine. However, when you move beyond the turret itself, interesting features start to appear. On the top back, you have the platform of the aft superstructure. As you can see on the surface here, that should be much higher up. It's fallen down to the point it's resting on the back of the turret, something that shouldn't be surprising when you look down. The entire barbette is visible at the bottom. Popping back to the surface shot, well, that shouldn't be here at all. The deck should be up to the base of the turret. Only a sliver, relatively speaking, of the barbette should be visible. This is our first look at how badly the stern collapsed, and when we move down even slightly, it's more apparent. I'm not joking when I say the entire barbette is visible. It really is, right down to the bottom. The deck isn't just collapsed, it's gone. You can even see the side of the hull here with the prop guard. That shows how much the side has also collapsed inward, not just down. We'll be returning to that later in the video. For now, let's turn back to the turret itself. When we move up on this, more of the aft superstructure is visible to the side, along with the barrels to the front. However, there's still no visible damage. Not even when you move further back and look at the front of the turret. The turret face and the barrels are fine, though you can see the remnants of the canvas guard here, both the canvas itself and the framework of it. That's a first for one of these wrecks, I think. The barrels, on the other hand, are basically the same as her sisters. No damage, just a lot of coral. The front angle shot here continues that theme, with admittedly a nice look down the barrels. You can even faintly make out some of the rifling from this angle. That said, when you look from the other side of the turret, well, not much changes there. It's mostly a better look at the barbette, which again shouldn't be this visible. When you move a bit further out, more of the turret is apparent, but there's still no damage matching up with the damage plate. Only one hit was recorded to the third turret, and not in a location we've seen. So, with little else to touch on, let's wrap up the main battery here, with this nice pair of shots showing the barrels coming out of the darkness. The very shiny barrels, despite how long they've been underwater. It makes for a fitting place to end things, I think, as we shift to the lighter weaponry. Since we're on the stern, we'll start with the Chicago pianos, the quad 1.1-inch cannon mounts, which are pointing up, because the stern has collapsed in between them, just like on Vincennes. It's admittedly given a good look at the mounts here. The barrels on one with a crab hanging on, and the entire mount in the background for the other set. Something we can see better from ahead here. Both mounts are tilted up to varying degrees, with the one on the right just that bit higher up. However, tilted or not, both of them are in relatively pristine condition. The mounts and the guns are intact, with little in the way of real damage. Something much more apparent from closer in here, where the gun tub has collapsed along with the deck, but the mount is in one piece, despite the deck itself falling in here. From a bit further up, the same applies to the other mount. It's in pretty much identical shape, with both of them a fair bit more rusted out compared to, say, Hornet or Yorktown. Either way, that wraps things up here as well. So it's time to round off the weaponry with the various 5-inch guns. I won't spend long on these, simply because they're about the same as the ones on any other American wreck. The first of them here at least has the distinction of pointing straight up. I'm not sure why it is, mind you. It could be from water pressure in the sinking, for example, or the elevation mechanism rusting out. Whatever the reason, it's left the barrel pointing straight towards the surface, as you can see better here, along with a mud-covered deck and some scattered debris. The superstructure, unfortunately, is too dark to make out, though the mount is actually surprisingly well preserved, even if it is buried. The railing is intact, as is the blast shield. When we move further along, meanwhile, more of the debris is apparent. There's a lot of ruined metal between the two mounts, with the second mount covered in loose lines, which to my eye look like fishing lines. A common issue with shipwrecks, no matter the location. Lines aside, this gun is laying flat, pointing out where it might have engaged the Japanese during the battle, with a higher angle shot showing even more line behind it clustered here. And yet more of that fishing line is apparent on the other side of the wreck, where we have one of the other guns pointing towards the amidships deck with a lot of line ahead of the barrel, along with what looks like a pair of small shell holes punched into the blast shield. That tangled fishing line is more visible from a bit further up, along with some of the ship's wiring here and the barrel barely in frame. That fishing line is why Nautilus didn't do a direct over-the-top flyby. Far too much risk of getting tangled up in the lines. The death knell of any ROV. Still, while we may not have a good top look, we do have good side looks, such as this one of another 5-inch gun. Another one pointing in, giving us an excellent look at the breach, or at least as much as we can see beyond the rust and silt. This weapon hasn't fared nearly as well as the turrets, and much of it is unrecognizable, aside from the railing here and the ready ammunition stowage here. Now for the last 5-inch gun. This one is also pointing up, where it's become completely entangled in fishing line. from the tip of the barrel down to the mount itself. Quincy is a hazardous wreck for an ROV survey, as you can tell. Likely why there wasn't any focus on the bridge tower this time around. Regardless, let's move to the aft superstructure now, and from there to the hull. The first and most notable part of that superstructure is this bit here, one of the two bases for the catapults. We saw the same structure on her sisters, of course, but on Quincy, well, just look. This one shows more of the collapsed deck from the angle it's resting at. A sharp angle. Admittedly, the catapult base and the hull side show little in the way of damage. There's an intact ladder here, and the side shows very little, rust aside. Even the rivets are still visible, something that continues as you move up the base, though the catapult itself is, of course, missing. That is also common between the sister ships. Less common, on the other hand, is this bit of structure here. It's intact, or at least mostly so, but it's also only a brief glimpse in shadow. This is actually the reason I suspect that Quincy hasn't gotten a dedicated Nautilus video. It's difficult to put one together with what they were able to work around. That fishing line really made it a lot more difficult than it already is diving on such a deep wreck. In any case, a bit further along, we come to that tangled fishing line on the 5-inch gun. That stretches into the background where it's wrapped around what I believe to be the aft tower, or what's left of it at any rate. From this angle, it's just too dark to make out anything, other than where that line stretches up towards the surface here, and from closer in here, some more of the tower, along with what seems to be some of the funnel liner. Or at least that's what Nautilus identified the shiny metal as on Vincennes. Whereas here, we return to that bit of superstructure from before. We still can't see it very well, though I believe this is where the second funnel would have been. You can see the area here on the surface. This cutaway in the side in particular is distinctive, even if it has collapsed on the bottom. The funnel itself is, of course, long gone. The same can be said for the rest of the structure around it. Very little remains at this point, though we do get a good look from close in, even if it mostly serves to show how much is rusted. Further along, meanwhile, we have the catapult base again, though there's not exactly much difference from the other pictures, aside from being more real color with less of the deep water blue tint. There are a couple holes in it that we can see now, one here by the ladder, and one on the bottom here. Both seem to be rust damage to my eye. They don't look like shell holes. That aside, we can wrap up the superstructure now by looking to the aft tower. From afar, there's not much to note. We can see the overall shape with some busted metal towards the bottom. Metal we see better here, including where the hanger has been almost peeled back. And from a bit further down, we have the base of the tower, where you can see how it's falling down towards the stern, especially here where it's resting against the back of the third turret, with this doorway down here showing how far down it's fallen, while the battle damage is more apparent here. The metal is twisted and broken, and the platform is collapsing here, while the tower itself is starting to rust through further back, as you can see in more detail here. Despite this, some details are still there, like the cabling here or the doorway beside it, even if the base of the fire control equipment is shattered, with the rangefinder in particular completely gone here, right above where the platform is resting on the number 3 turret. we see that area from above here. The platform, the rangefinder base, and a 20mm gun. All three are rough, as you could expect, but at the same time, well, they're arguably better than the hangar area. We see that here, where the metal is gone. Moving up the tower shows a devastated side, with much of the superstructure burnt and rusted out. This shot in particular is scary for how much of it is bowed in here. The area above isn't terrible by comparison, which can't be said for the actual hangar, which is shattered. There's nothing left. The fires here would have been particularly bad, and that's led to much of the structure rusting away, where it wasn't plain burnt away. However, that wraps up the superstructure, with 3 more pictures here. First, this one of some sort of debris resting on the deck. It looks like it might be what's left of the funnel, but I can't be sure. While this picture, for its part, has the catapult resting on the deck, along with a hose here, likely part of the effort to fight the fires, though those failed to save the ship. The last picture, meanwhile, is the other catapult base, one that's more upright, but otherwise much the same. Now, with that sorted, let's round off this lengthier than expected video with the stern. Here, by the hangar, we see the start of the collapse, along with the remnants of her paint scheme. As we move further aft, the damage is even more apparent. The stern has bowed in, with the prop guard almost vertical, while the prop itself is buried in the mud. From above, the bowed-in deck is easier to see. Quincy's stern deck is basically gone, at least here. Even here, the side of the hull is falling inward. It's not quite as bad further back towards the Chicago pianos. Bad, certainly, but at least the deck is still recognizable. Even if, when you reach the extreme stern, things get bad again. Here, the stern shows implosion damage, something that all 3 of the American cruisers show. It's an interesting feature that matches up across the ships. Though, unsurprisingly, Quincy is the worst off here. The aft of the ship has been punched in pretty comprehensively, especially towards the bottom, while above that, the rust is so severe that there's no sign of her name, just rusted metal and coral. And if you thought the other side was any better, it really isn't. If anything, it's crumpled in more over here. If you wanted to see what implosion damage looked like on a cruiser, well, here it is. It's not pretty how the steel has crumpled and buckled. It's worse here, but this area isn't much better with that jagged pattern. Even the rudder here is crumpled in. Something like what you saw on Scorpion, actually, showing this is certainly implosion damage. That said, we've reached the end of the video. I'll round things off here with one of the props. We have the shaft here, which isn't buried on this side, covered in rust, but not buried. On the other hand, the blades show clear damage here and here, likely a result of the other one breaking away, leaving just the empty prop shaft to the side. It seemed like a fitting image to end on. Another sign of the damage Quincy took, even if a less obvious kind in this case. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.